Debbie's infected! No! No! Jen! No! Jen!
The traditional zombie movie lore usually follows the concept of reanimating the dead, who were back then as violent monstrosities that attacked the living. 28 Days Later was hailed as one of the best zombie flicks of all time because it changed the popular notion and introduced a unique threat to humanity that came through the rage virus. This virus affected the living and turned them into a violent, unrecognizable version of themselves. It's highly infectious, and the situation only becomes worse in the sequel 28 weeks later. Now, with a new movie set to relaunch the franchise with 28 years later, we thought it might be a good time to explore everything there is to know about the rage virus in this video. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. How did 28 Days Later first introduce the rage virus? The post-apocalyptic zombie horror flick by Danny Boyle back in 2002 shows the origins of the rage virus, and it's simply a terrifying fallout of a scientific endeavor gone wrong. It starts off with a group of animal rights activists who infiltrate a laboratory in Cambridge. This facility has a few extremely aggressive chimpanzees who have been tested upon, and the activists take a scientist hostage and free one of the chimpanzees, despite warnings from the scientists, who tries to make them understand that the chimpanzee is infected with a highly contagious virus. Of course, the consequences are dire, and the chimp attacks the activists who freed it. Within a matter of seconds, she's infected as well, and the scientists suggest desperately that she needs to be killed before it starts an epidemic. The confused activists fail to take the right measures, and the infected activist attacks them. It starts off an uncontrollable chain reaction as the virus rapidly spreads across Great Britain and results in a complete collapse of society. Exploring the history of the rage virus. We've already revealed that the rage virus is the result of a scientific experiment gone wrong, and the actual history of the virus is rather tragic, and it's been elaborated in a graphic novel continuation of the film called 28 Days Later, The Aftermath. A couple of scientists from Cambridge, Clive and Warren, were asked to attempt to isolate the exact neurochemicals that cause excessive aggression in humans. The motive was to come up with an inhibitor that can regulate this anger, and this would be a blessing for those suffering from anger issues. One of the scientists tried to use the Ebola virus as a delivery system, but the results were not what they were expecting. Within a couple weeks, many isolated genomes of the Ebola virus seemed to react to the inhibitor and mutated, which caused the inhibitor to have the opposite effect. Instead of controlling the anger, it caused the host to display uncontrollable rage, which eventually became the rage virus that throws humanity into an extinction threat. Once the rage virus was accidentally developed, Clive, one of the working scientists, quit the project in disgust and guilt. He even informed the Animal Freedom Front about the experimentation that was conducted on the animals. However, the threat of the virus was far from contained, and things got out of hand after the animal rights activist group stormed the laboratory and released one of the infected chimpanzee test subjects. The chimpanzee immediately attacked the activists, and one of them got infected, who in turn infected a scientist and the other activists as well. In very short time, the rage virus spread across Great Britain uncontrollably. Even though the rage virus is a recombinant strain of Ebola and shows some symptoms of Ebola, the psychological symptoms are more similar to that of rabies. It's interesting to note here that while the movies make it out to be more of an accidental development in the laboratory, the comic series also suggests that the virus was developed as a biological weapon. However, the fan theories largely side with the former, and since the biological weapon angle was propagated by a character named Dr. Billingsworth, many believe that they might actually be speculating the whole thing. During the initial stages of the spread of the virus, it started to affect the whole of mainland Britain through small villages and market towns. The media portrayed it as rioting, but the public soon discredited the false narrative when the reality of the virus was out in the open. After only 80 days into the spread of the infection, the Prime Minister declared a state of emergency and imposed martial law on the country. Even military blockades were overrun by the infected, and the handful of survivors tried their best to flee the country. Within 15 days, mainland Britain was quarantined by NATO and UN, but the events of the second film 28 weeks later proved that this was not enough to contain the rampant spread of the rage virus. In the first 28 days following the outbreak, there was a complete societal collapse, and apart from a few groups of scattered survivors, the entire population was either dead or infected, or had managed to escape before NATO and the UN imposed quarantine. What is the science behind the deadly nature of the rage virus? Every aspect of sci-fi is ultimately rooted in science, even if it's an exaggerated version of the same. As for the rage virus, the origin of the virus and its workings are deeply involved with the workings of the human brain. The idea of reinventing zombies as living humans with a deadly infection is not that outrageous after all. As the name suggests, the rage virus is actually rooted in human rage, an emotion that we are all too familiar with, even if we are the calmest of individuals in general. It's an ordinary part of human life, and the brain functions have been decoded by the scientists in this regard. The amygdala is the part of the brain that's responsible for putting in such intense emotions like anger. Whenever we experience potentially dangerous or unexpected stimuli, a few things happen in the brain involuntarily. Firstly, the brain takes in the information and tries to process an adequate response. Now, the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain responsible for higher reasoning and logical thinking, but the process takes time that is often not available in such situations of emergency. For instance, a sudden loud noise could be a gunshot, and in such a case, the brain must act with urgency to respond. In these situations, the amygdala comes into the picture, and it basically sets off alarm bells in the body and floods the system with emergency hormones like adrenaline. This makes us prepared for a fight, but it also impairs logical thinking for the time being. The prefrontal cortex takes time to jump into action, and by then the heart rate and blood pressure are both up. We have all heard of cases where an individual dared to take on a severe threat single-handedly, or drove home after being shot in a car, and these are all because of the actions of the amygdala. There have been studies that have proven that any damage to the prefrontal cortex can result in increased anger and aggression. Those individuals who have a damaged prefrontal cortex have been shown to have greater difficulty in managing emotions, which evidently leads to a heightened aggressive state. The rage virus suppresses the ability of the prefrontal cortex to manage anger, and it's a permanent and irreversible case, where the sensitivity of the amygdala is heightened as well. This just goes on to show what a powerful tool the human brain can be, and if handled incorrectly or affected by a virus that damages vital parts of the brain, humans can turn out to be vicious and violent monsters quite realistically. The only thing that is probably a bit too exaggerated in the movies and comic series is the rapid infection speed of seconds, because in real life, it would be almost impossible for any virus to show such symptoms in such a short period of time, no matter how fast it spreads. The rage virus works like any other deadly virus in the real world, where the primary motive of the virus is to reproduce and spread among more hosts. For this, the approach needs to be measured, because if the virus is too fatal for the host, then in very short time, they wouldn't last long. This probably explains why the rage virus would also need some people to act as the host and carry the virus around without sustaining the deadly impact themselves. We elaborate more on this later in the video when we talk about the potential immunity aspect of this virus. How does the rage virus spread? The rage virus is one of the most infectious and deadly viruses that you can imagine, and it's spread through blood and saliva. It's so contagious that even a drop of infected fluid can infect a host. The most common method of infection is through bites from the infected, who are in a state of uncontrolled fury. However, we've seen that the virus can also spread through the exchange of saliva. This was observed when one of the survivors kissed an asymptomatic host and became infected. Also, as much as a drop of the infected blood in the eyes or mouth of the host can cause an infection in a matter of seconds. Once infected, the host starts to show signs of infection within 10 to 20 seconds. However, this is also dependent on the amount of virus that the host is exposed to. A few drops take it around 20 to 30 seconds, while a greater amount can cause the infection instantly. In the movie 28 Weeks Later, Don and his wife Alice encounter an attack by the infected people. Don manages to escape, and Alice is presumed to be infected or killed. However, later it's found out that Alice is still alive, but in a delirious, semi-conscious state. The soldiers take her to District 1 and place her in isolation, and a test reveals that she is an asymptomatic carrier of the rage virus. Things take a turn for the worst when Don decides to make an unauthorized visit to Alice, and he begs forgiveness for abandoning her earlier. In an emotional moment, he kisses her and gets infected almost immediately. He then proceeds to kill her and go on a violent rampage. This shows that the rage virus can also spread through saliva, and even a kiss can be deadly if one of the two is a carrier. How does a human react after being exposed to the rage virus? When a human host is infected by the rage virus, it only takes seconds for the infection to take hold of the body. An infected host experiences painful spasms and uncontrollable twitches, and some might also experience convulsions as the rage virus takes over the entire system. They also begin to bleed from their eyes and mouth, and the eyes are usually bloodshot after the infection is complete. This happens because after succumbing to the rage virus, the host's capillaries start to hemorrhage. There are a few seconds of consciousness left in the individual, which which can be seen when the first woman is infected following the chimpanzee attack, and she exclaims that she feels a burning sensation. The infected host then suffers from extreme, uncontrollable aggression and violence, and has a complete loss of higher intelligence. They seek out and attack anyone who's uninfected, and this seems like the primary goal of the individual. The infected also have enhanced mobility and endurance, and only the lack of self-nourishment can bring them down, as lore suggests. That being said, even though the infected individuals show greater strength and reflexes, they're not immortal or invincible. Many of them have been gunned down or blown to bits, and the only problem in eliminating them all is that the infection doesn't give enough time to contain the spread. The ones who have been recently infected are usually active during the day, and the ones who have been infected for longer periods of time are shown to be active during the night. Because of the short time taken for this contagious virus to be transmitted, a small area can be infected within an hour, where thousands would be infected. This causes a chain reaction that cannot be contained until extreme quarantine measures are adopted, and even that proves to be ineffective at times, as we've seen in the second movie. It's been suggested that, like the Ebola virus, the rage virus only affects primates, like species of monkeys and humans. Any infection among non-primate animals is unheard of, and they are most likely unaffected by the virus. So far, the rage virus infection has been shown to be rather irreversible, and we might see a change in that stance in the upcoming movies of the franchise. What happened to the infection process post-outbreak? Once the rage virus gripped Great Britain, the ones who were initially infected started to die of starvation. In a time span between 5 weeks to 6 months following the first signs of outbreak, almost all those infected in mainland Britain had died of starvation. Those who were infected further north, especially in Scotland, were infected later and were still surviving. However, the spread of the infection didn't stop, and it spread from mainland Britain to Shetland, the island that was secretly being quarantined by the American military. There was even a second outbreak following the attempt of the US Army to repopulate London after most of the infected had died. It spread through an asymptomatic carrier, and by the end of the second movie, we see how the infection had invaded mainland Europe as well. Several drastic measures were taken to contain the infection, from poisonous gases to attack helicopters and armed troops decimating the infected individuals. However, the nature of the infection is such that nothing seems to put a complete end to its spreading. Can someone be immune to the rage virus? Like any other virus, even the deadliest ones, there are always a handful of those who are immune to the impact of the infection. It's no different with the rage virus, and 28 weeks later revealed the possibility of immunity even if someone is a carrier of the virus. According to a study, almost 5 to 35% of the population might be infected with influenza without even knowing about it, and the rage virus also acts similarly even though the percentage of asymptomatic individuals might be far less. Someone who doesn't display any noticeable symptoms of the virus will still have their left eye sclera partially turning red, which we've seen in Alice. The climactic moments of 28 weeks later showed Andy, who was bitten by Dawn after the latter was infected. However, Andy showed no symptoms whatsoever, just like Alice in the earlier sequence. We're eager to find out if 28 years later plays along with the immunity angle and explores it further. Can Dawn and Alice's children be the key to the cure? 28 weeks later introduces some interesting characters, but few hold more importance than the children of Dawn and Alice. If you remember the movie, Alice was an asymptomatic carrier of the virus, and Dawn became infected after kissing her. However, a US Army medical officer named Scarlett believed that their children, Tammy and Andy, could be the key to finding a cure because of their unique genetic makeup. The children are rescued even as Dawn kills numerous refugees and military personnel housed in the supposed safe zone, District 1. After District 1 is bombed, the likes of Scarlett, Tammy, Andy, and a few other survivors flee. Later, Scarlett and the children are escorted to the Wembley Stadium, and they escape into the London Underground, only to be attacked by an infected Dawn who kills Scarlett. After Dawn bites Andy, Tammy is forced to kill Dawn, but even Andy shows no symptoms, even though he becomes a carrier following the bite. They're eventually flown to France, but the end of the movie suggests that even mainland Europe has now been infected by the rage virus. Andy might have infected others just like Alice did, even though she didn't have any symptoms. We hope to find the answer to this nail-biting climax, and more importantly, there might be some hope in the genetic build of people like Andy, who are able to withstand the brutal effects of the virus even when they're infected. If Scarlett was right about using and understanding their bodily composition to come up with a cure, it might just be what gets humanity out of this apocalyptic doom. How did the rage virus hit other continents? The end of 28 weeks later clearly shows that the impact of the rage virus has now engulfed Paris and mainland Europe. Billions have been killed and infected, and even the other continents like Asia and parts of Africa have probably been hit. The primary reason behind the spreading of the virus might be asymptomatic people like Alice and Andy who have carried the virus across borders without anybody knowing about the dangers that come with them. If Don kissing his asymptomatic wife can cause a massive outbreak, we can imagine several ways by which someone like Andy can unknowingly infect others and stir up a deadly apocalypse. Also, it's worth noting that a chimpanzee was able to transmit the disease among humans in the first movie. If birds and other animals are capable of doing the same, this might be the loophole that everyone failed to plug and got the other continents infected, despite the best efforts to contain it to Great Britain. It was established in the comments that the reason for the rage virus not making it to the rest of Europe was that any bird flying to their coast was gunned down. Again, if you consider the main inspiration behind the virus, which is Ebola, then it can only infect primates. But we're then ruling out the possibility of the virus itself being airborne. The debates around the spread can be plentiful, and we hope to find a few answers in the upcoming 28 years later.
Eyes drop, they will get the top of you. Food, food.
Is 28 years later going to change the nature of the rage virus? Now that CinemaCon gave us a closer look at the trailer of 28 years later, the remarkable zombie franchise seems to be back with a bang. The new installment is supposed to kick off a brand new trilogy, and the best part about the project is that the original director-writer duo of Danny Boyle and Alex Garland has returned for the movie. The cast includes the likes of Aaron Taylor Johnson, Ralph Fiennes, Jodie Comer, Jack O'Connell, and Aaron Kellyman, and some new details have been revealed about the movie. The quick trailer opens up with three guys in military gear in a dark room getting jumped by a zombie. The scene cuts away to an island which supposedly houses some of the survivors. There are some quick glimpses of the survivors running from the infected, and many other scenes show them fighting the infected as well. It's also been hinted at that time is running out fast for the survivors, and from the looks of it, the stakes of the post-apocalyptic world are even higher this time around. Aaron Taylor Johnson's character Jamie and his son can be seen fleeing from the infected, and it's no different for the military men as well. The title suggests that the upcoming movie is set almost 3 decades after the outbreak of the rage virus, and things might not have gotten any better with time. The island is safer than the mainland, but even this safety is probably not permanent in nature. We also expect some more updates about the future of the rage virus, and some mutated version of the virus that might be threatening those who are still unaffected after all this time. It has already been shown in the earlier movies that the rage virus evolves very fast, and we believe that the infected ones in 28 years later will be different from what we're used to, because the virus has now evolved through nearly 3 decades. The trailer shows an individual standing patiently, even as one of the infected ones nearby goes on a mechanical rampage. If this individual is infected, then it might mean that the new traits of the virus on humans include a greater self-control than before. If they now have purpose and thinking abilities, alongside their uncontrolled fury, we might be in for a deadlier version of zombies than in the earlier movies. Now that the horror fans have already created quite a stir around this project, 28 years later is already projected as one of the most anticipated movies of the year. The continuation of the franchise and the beginning of what is supposed to be a well thought out trilogy means that the expectations are high from this one, and with an interesting cast and original creators back on board, we don't think the movie will disappoint. Marvelous verdict. This could be the next big thing in horror cinema. When 28 Days Later first hit the theaters back in 2002, the audience was thrilled to come across a fresh storyline using the same old zombie concept in a new avatar. The sequel did not get the best response, but now, with the announcement of 28 Years Later, things might just be looking up once again. The director Danny Boyle has hinted that fans might have to wait patiently for the original star of 28 Days Later, Cillian Murphy, to appear in the trilogy. Meanwhile, the other movie of the new trilogy, The Bone Temple, is also ready, as suggested by the director Nia DaCosta. As for the third movie, the financing has not been finalized, but we're certain that a good show for the first 2 films will seal the deal. Yes, we've seen some hyped up projects go down the drain in recent times, but this franchise has the potential to be the next big thing in the horror genre, and we're keeping our fingers crossed for a well-made movie. Do let us know in the comments down below what you think about the concept of 28 Days Later and the rage virus, and also share your views on the main culprit of the outbreak, the highly infectious and dangerous rage virus.